So one of them, and by the way, most of these people, this is another reason why it's an interesting I called the book xenophobia. It's like there's something psychiatric going on. Most of these people are quite prominent, really well decorated scholars. So one of them is Sean Wilentz. He's not just a professor of history at Princeton. Princeton's an Ivy League school, a big major one, and he's a full professor. He's not just a full professor. He's the Sidney and Ruth Lapidus professor. So it's like a named thing, which is really prestigious. This is what he said. When Zinn died, the Los Angeles Times wanted to do an article about him. And so they asked some prominent historians to comment. And so this is what Wilentz said. Quote, Zinn had a very simplified view that everyone who was president was always a stinker and every left-winger was always great. That can't be true. Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. You wouldn't know that from Howard Zinn. So think about what he's claiming there. As I mentioned before, Zinn is much more critical of sort of the standard American heroes than most history textbooks are. So he's saying, yeah, even Abraham Lincoln who freed the slaves, that's something good. So Zinn's not going to tell you that. So I want to make sure you get this. This is the exact quote. I won't read the whole thing. Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. You wouldn't know that from Howard Zinn. What did I do? I opened up A People's History and I went to the chapter on the Civil War. On the very first page, which is page 171, I found the following statement, quote, it was Abraham Lincoln who freed the slaves. I think you'll agree with me. I'll bet you I said freshman in college. I'll bet you guys in your class, if you wrote a paper where you tried to refute someone by saying he wouldn't even admit X, and then you open up and you find he says X right where you'd expect it. I mean, that's pretty bad scholarship. So that's an example. So here's another one. I mentioned, this is the other one I'll mention, and then I'll stop and give you guys a chance to talk and ask questions. So since Zinn was on the left politically, a good way to smear someone on the left is to accuse them of being like soft on the Soviet Union back in the Cold War days, because Zinn was writing in 1980, which was during the
Are you still there, Dr. Detmer? Can you go back
yeah,
can you go back like
yes.
10 seconds? Just did this last time too. I don't know. Our internet connection just like lagged out. Can you go back just a little bit? We lost it.
Yes. So, okay. So, did I finish my point about Sean Wilentz and Abraham Lincoln? Did I finish
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'll pick it up right there then. So the next one, I was saying that since Zinn was on the left politically, a good way to sort of smear someone like that during the Cold War era is to accuse them of being soft on the Soviet Union, sort of America's big enemy during the Cold War era. And so David Greenberg, a professor of history at Rutgers University, that's what he did in something he wrote on Zinn. And he wrote the following, quote, Zinn relentlessly criticized American policy and seems to have stayed silent about the Soviet Union. So when I read that, I immediately focused on the phrase seemed to stay silent. And I thought, that's kind of bad scholarship. You shouldn't be writing that someone seemed to stay silent. You should look at their works and see what they said on it. And so it turns out that Zinn said things like the following about the Soviet Union. This is a quotation from one of Zinn's writings. The Soviet Union has been brutal in its treatment of its own citizens, murdering peasants in large numbers during the process of collectivization, imprisoning, torturing, and executing those it considered dissidents, whether ordinary people, intellectuals, artists, or distinguished leaders of the 1917 revolution. The term police state fits it very well. In my book, I provide a number of other quotations from Zinn's work in which he uses the following words in describing the Soviet Union: ruthless, oppressive, brutal, murderous, a dictatorship, a police state, an example of fascism. And he criticizes its, quote, aggression, its atrocities, and its monstrous tyranny. And all of these things are said multiple times and said it works right where you would expect them. Like one of them is in an article called Communism and Anti-Communism. And others of these quotes are in the book A People's History, which is the one Greenberg is supposedly talking about. So again, this would be bad for a college freshman. It would be bad for a high school student. I mean, think about if in one of your papers you said, oh, here's this guy who says nothing bad about the Soviet Union. And then in 10 seconds, I can find a whole bunch of statements where he calls the Soviet Union murders. So these are tenured professors at major universities who commit these scholarly atrocities. And so I think, this just shows how high the stakes are in these battles over history, that, they're able to get away with this sort of stuff. I mean, to some extent they get away with it. So someone like me comes along and writes a book and points it out, and so the people who read my book know about it, but by and large they're able to get away with this kind of stuff. So history is this huge battleground. People really fight over it.